So this is a field that was disturbed and then just let go. So this is a typical example of naturalization or rewilding. And this is what happens when you get that first flush of species that come out here. And most of these species are not native to the area. The goldenrod, the yellow flowers, the solidago is native, and it's one of the first species to arrive that's native. But what's happening to the soil in this area? So you have the soil, it's very depleted. So you can see on this road it's compacted, it doesn't have any vegetation. And so what are the initial colonizing species, the pioneer species, are things like ragweed, Queen Anne's lace, and you can see there's a ton of Queen Anne's lace. Things like this is horseweed. So these are not native to Canada, but they're species that are colonizing these areas. They have an ability to colonize this very disturbed soil, and it allows for the soil to start healing, because these species have special adaptations. Okay, maybe the site is low on nitrogen, maybe it's low on phosphorus, maybe it's low on some other micronutrient, and these early pioneer species are able to extract that. They're able to work with the microbial community that's there. They're reestablishing that microbial community, secreting sugars into the ground to help reestablish that community in the ground. And also they're rapidly adding organic matter to the soil. So you have to think about what it is your goal. Do we just allow it, natural processes to go, and maybe this will never become a very natural setting? It'll have tons of exotic species because you're in an area with high invasive species pressure. And maybe this is okay. Maybe this is your goal. You don't have a lot of money. This has got some wildflowers in it. It is some habitat for wildlife, but it's not a high functioning habitat. You're not getting a lot of biodiversity in this. And it's going to take a very long time for this to succeed back into a much more diverse meadow. It's also going to take a long time to seed back into forest. Or do you kickstart the system? And that's what we did on the other side of the road, and I'll show you that, how we've kickstarted the system. We've added the seed for the meadow species, and we moved it towards a high diversity meadow. And so you're just considering what sort of treatment do you want to do? Is this okay? You're happy with a much longer successional period, and that's fine too. It will eventually, maybe takes 30 years before this will start to become more of a natural setting, rather than kickstarting it and maybe just putting some seed in for different species, so that you're kickstarting the system and getting it moving towards a more natural system. In Toronto, you may not get that natural system back as easily because there isn't the seed sources. You've paved areas, you've moved the water off the land, and so you've changed the habitat, and so you may never move this to a more natural ecosystem with any speed at all, because there isn't the seed sources, there isn't seed rain, there isn't the biodiversity of wildlife moving in the native seeds from different areas and helping you out. And you also have these invasive species that are holding the site and not allowing the native species to come in, because a lot of times it's whoever comes first is going to hold the site, and it's much harder to get other species to come in once you have that established. Over on this side, you can see we have sumac, which is an early pioneer tree. So there's actually a woodland down in here, and this is kind of the edge effect, the transition back into forest. So the early successional species is the sumac, but underneath here, all this stuff is dog strangling vine, like almost a complete monoculture. So it's not allowing any sort of native vegetation to recolonize underneath there, because it's so dense. It's taking up all the light, it's taking up all the micronutrients, it's altering the microbial community to suit it. And so you have this shade community, it's shade tolerant, but so you have a natural regeneration starting, but then if you have all this invasive species in here, you're not going to get very good regeneration because of that. And so you have to think, okay, do I go in and actively manage that, or am I happy with this ecosystem the way it is? Do we need to remove this invasive species, or is this invasive species so prevalent because it's a complete blanket here that there's not much we can do? And how do we facilitate the natural regeneration of the forest when you have this invasive species here? Because you're not going to get the spring ephemerals and the natural woodland species coming into this until you remove the invasive species. We're out here in a tall grass prairie restoration, a meadow restoration project, and you can see the different species that are blooming in the fall. We've got all sorts of different aster species, purple ones, white ones, tall ones, short ones, and we also have all the goldenrod species out here as well. But what you can't see is the diversity of species that have already bloomed and now they're setting seed. So down here you can see things like blue vervain are coming. We have a pensimon species, foxglove beard tongue. We have things like oxeye, and things like black-eyed Susan. So you're not only are you trying to get all these fall blooming species, but you need to consider having food sources all throughout the season. So these have already bloomed. Some of them are blooming in the spring, some are blooming in the summer, and some are blooming earlier in the fall. So you want to have a seed source, a nectar source for your native bees, for your native pollinators, not only just in one season, but in every season. So they have something. And then a lot of these species have lots of seed. And here you can see black-eyed Susan. You can see all the black seed that's in there, and the birds love to eat that. The oxeye sunflower, it would have had a lot of seeds, but it's been picked clean. All the native wildlife has eaten all the seeds already. So the same with these. There's different seeds for different species, and they have different strategies. You know, with the Galapagos bills, they all have different bills, so they can all get different seeds and utilize them. So making sure you have that biodiversity in here, and bloom time, different times of year, and just making sure you have a healthy habitat. You can see the patchiness of this here. You can see more asters in bloom. Over there you can see more goldenrods in bloom. So allowing for that natural fluctuation, that constant blinking in and blinking out. You know, this year was a dry year, so okay, the goldenrods are better adapted to a drier conditions. Another year is wetter, and so some of the asters may be better suited for that. And so you're allowing for that movement of species, and if you don't have all the species complement, maybe it doesn't work very well in a dry season. You don't have that species suite that's adapted to dry conditions. Or if you have a really wet year, or if you have a little pocket like this that's coming down and you have a moisture strip through here, then you don't have those wet species that are going to colonize in a wet year. So just understanding the topography that you're working with. Here it's going up a little bit higher, so it's going to be a little drier there. The water here is focusing down into this little bit of a depression, and so you're getting a moisture area. The moisture is coming out of the mound, and then the moisture comes down into the moisture area. So having this variation in topography, drier areas, moisture areas, is also adding to that habitat heterogeneity, allowing more species to exist within a more diverse landscape. and allowing the movement of species back and forth. Many times when I'm out seed collecting, I notice one year a ditch will be completely black-eyed Susan. 2 years later, suddenly it's all blue vervain. The next year, it's all Joe Pye weed. So without that variation in the species composition and the seed bank that it's producing in different years, you have different conditions, and it allows for those species to occur in that area. And if you don't have a wide range of biodiversity, if you choose a very small subset of those species, you may not be having that full range and allowing for the natural movement of species and the natural succession to happen back and forth. And it's just constant play, constant movement. And so when you're working with a system like this, you need to do what's called adaptive management. And that means looking at the species that are here and saying, okay, what do I need to do to maintain the maximum amount of biodiversity? Maybe there's a little too much goldenrod here, and that's okay this year, but if it's always going to be goldenrod, because the goldenrod has allelochemicals that suppresses other species, maybe there's too much goldenrod in this area, and you have to think about, okay, maybe I need to manage for the goldenrod, reduce the goldenrod a little bit so it allows for other species to come in, or maybe the goldenrod's setting it up so that in the future you're having a more diverse habitat and there's a pioneer species. So you have to take all these things into consideration when you're doing a habitat restoration project. Considering how this is a natural variation in the landscape, but because it's been repeatedly tilled and because it was in lawn, basically, this whole area was mown about 5 or 6 times a year. They came in and they mowed this area, so it was very homogeneous in its characteristics. And so putting back some of that heterogeneity is really important if you want to have different species. When I came in here first for this ecological restoration project, it was all turf, but 50% of that turf was mown dog strangling vine. So that invasive species dog strangling vine is so tough that it can be mown down to turf. So you're getting a lawn effect, but 50% of them was dog strangling vine. So if I just came in here, tilled it up, prepared the soil and then seeded it right away, we would have had mostly dog strangling vine taking over this whole area. We wouldn't have had all these different wildflowers that are here. So it's really important to have good site preparation, reducing the seed bank, killing off invasive species and species that are going to be a problem when you're doing your native plant installation. And if you don't do that properly, you're going to have a huge weed seed bank. And so you're tilling repeatedly. I mean, a lot of people, different farmers, will do what's called a spray till, and I tried very hard to reduce the amount of chemicals that were being used in this project. And so we worked with doing just tilling. We put a cover crop down of oats, and then that came up. We allowed it to grow to about 10 centimeters, 15 centimeters, and then we rototilled it back in again. So that organic matter went back into the soil, but it also allowed for the weed seeds to germinate, because we didn't do it at a full oat seeding rate. We did it at about 50%, which allowed for the weed species to germinate in between, but it also allowed, because it's a cover crop, we wanted to hold the soil. We didn't want it blowing away, so we were tilling and then immediately cover coppering. And so these are different things you need to consider when you're working on an ecological restoration project. And here you can see, we've got different bees using these plants. And so it's already habitat. It's in early successional stage of becoming a meadow. And here we got a bumblebee. There's a honeybee. all sorts of different species are utilizing. Here's another bumblebee. So bumblebees are native, but the European honeybee is not native. So wherever that European honeybee is coming from, there must be a wild population around, because it's inside Toronto, so there's probably not any hives. But you can see the whole diversity of different native pollinators, and it's the native pollinators we want to enhance, not the honeybee, because the honeybee is an introduced species, an exotic species. Then you have species like this. This is Canada thistle, and so it's a very aggressive species, and it's one of the species that we've worked very hard at controlling in this area. And what we do is basically go in and we chop it right down at the base, and we're doing nutrient depletion when it starts to flower, before it sets seed, just as it's starting to flower. Most of the energy from the plant is coming up and feeding that flower, so it's depleting the root system and putting all that energy into reproduction. And you come along with a weed whacker or something that's going to cut it off, a machete, and you chop it off at the base, and then that reduces its viability. It doesn't produce seed, so it's not spreading everywhere, but then it also reduces its viability, and after a few years, sometimes it'll die the first year, and if it doesn't have enough nutrients in its root system to come back again, it'll die. But sometimes it takes multiple treatments coming back again and again, killing it back. And so this is a species of concern in this meadow. We don't want a lot of Canada thistle, because if you allow it to spread, it'll spread and take over a huge area, and it lowers the biodiversity, of course. You want to think about what can you do to create a little bit of topography on the site. How can you create some habitat heterogeneity in the site rather than having it completely flat? It was a little bit difficult in this project because it was a power corridor, and they wouldn't let us put any sort of topography in there. They wanted it completely flat. Adaptive management, so you're constantly monitoring what's going on in the project. Is there a problem occurring here? Did somebody dump some garbage over there? Are these neighbors happy? Are we getting enough monarch butterflies? All these different things, and then you're adapting your practices as you go. And again, back to site preparation, just the importance of preparing the site really, really well before you put your wildflowers and your native species in there, because if you don't, you may not get success in your project. Thank you.